Is for there to be an is not. And there had to be an is not for there to be an is. So it just is. That's its quality. That's its nature. Its existence itself. There is no why to it. There is only why within it.
Perfectly logical.
Yes.
Are the God archetypes built into a place and people the way information from the zodiac and constellations are? Or is it primarily a cultural thing?
Well, it's both, in the sense that the very idea of archetypes is built into the collective consciousness, the fabric of your collective consciousness, in order to give you the ability to experience symbols and signs and reflections from different symbols in your reality, different symbols in physical reality that can reflect to you different portions of your consciousness, help you get in touch with the rules of the game that you set up for yourselves to have an earth game experience. So it's built in, but it's also reflected because it's built in by any permission slip symbol you choose to use to connect you to the archetypal vibrational level of energy.
And since many gods are interdimensional beings, do any of them take human form and physically interact on occasion with humans, such as in the tales of Zeus? Does Zeus still visit Earth to do activities, even though he's fallen out of popularity as a symbol? And does Zeus have a message for the audience today?
The Zeus archetype still functions in your collective consciousness, of course, because once created in that way, nothing ever really leaves it. But it's perceived very differently because you have modernized yourselves to not necessarily represent it in the form of an idea called a god. But to answer the first question, yes, there are extra-dimensional beings and spirit beings who can take physical form and can represent themselves in a way that you're familiar enough with that you're willing to accept them in your reality. But in a sense, it's a disguise, it's a translation of who they really are or what they really are that makes itself known to you that way so that a connection can be made that you would recognize. So the idea of going back to Zeus is that the fundamental principle that Zeus represents in your society in this modern day and age is the idea of what you call the lightning strike of inspiration. You still even use the idea, oh, lightning has struck, when you become inspired by something. And that is the fundamental principle of the archetype of Zeus. It is the lightning strike of inspiration to your greater selves and can function as a connection to your higher minds, to the heavens, so to speak.
Yeah. Just on that topic of Greek gods and everything, the way that they were depicted in our history, are they actually just archetypes or were they ETs that were being personalized?
Well, again, both. Many cultures on your planet got to a point where they sort of forgot about the literal physical extraterrestrials that these concepts might have represented and simply rendered them down into the archetypal images that everyone could relate to on an energetic level or a consciousness level or a mental level. Not all of them are representative of literal individual extraterrestrials, but many of them are. It's just that down through time, you have forgotten that connection.
Okay. And are archetypes sentient beings?
They are autonomous unto themselves because, again, every depiction of consciousness in any form is autonomous unto itself as well as being part of the whole.
So is each one of us a unique archetype of God?
You are. Exactly so. That's the final equation to the understanding of archetypes, is that every single one of you and every single being in existence is an archetype of all that is.
Wow. Has your civilization made contact with angels or any other beings of that nature?
We communicate with higher frequency beings all the time. spirits, what you call angels, which are not necessarily exactly what you think. But yes, vibrationally, we communicate and connect to many different non-physical entities of various vibrational frequencies. It doesn't mean we're connecting to them all. We connect to the ones that are relevant for us.
And how do you express your emotions?
Very well, thank you.
Are you in control of your emotions?
Well, yes, of course. We simply express them as we naturally do. But the idea is that we also choose as a collective to express the idea of the positive emotions without necessarily invalidating what you would call the negative ones, even though fundamentally no emotion per se is really negative experientially, because it can always be used in a transformational way. But we understand what you mean by that. Nevertheless, we have no reason to express what you typically refer to as the negative emotions, because we understand creation clearly enough that it simply doesn't make sense for us to do that. But if you're asking, are we happy? Do we have a lot of fun? Do we experience love and joy? Absolutely. Do we laugh? Yes.
Have you ever experienced anger?
No.
Even as an aligning thing. So you're beyond needing to align. You're just always aligned. So you wouldn't express that emotion.
Correct. Now, the only way we can relate to it, again, is by having the incarnations in physical reality that express things that way to train us to understand your culture. So the idea of the emotions that the channel may have experienced, we can connect to them and we can examine and observe and even experience them to some degree. But the thing of it is even though we experience them, we know they're not ours. We know that it's a simulation for us. So we can get what we need out of experiencing the simulation by connecting to the vibrations of physical humans on your planet. But again, we understand it more as an observational experience. And even though we can, to some degree, feel it, we don't feel it in the same way you do, because it doesn't come with the judgmental agenda that you also attach to many of what you call your negative emotions.
So is that how you understood about anger, that you can experience it for, what did you say, about 15 seconds, and beyond that, in that context, it's aligning. Beyond that, it's judgment.
Yes. It's sort of similar to the idea of, let's say you're standing on dry land and you want to know what the experience of being dunked in water is. So someone dunks you in the water, but then puts you right back on dry land. And then you can say, all right, now I understand generally what that experience is about. Now I can explore all the aspects of it, but I don't necessarily experience it as a continuous thing in my culture. It's simply an experimental experience that's temporary, that I can use to the advantage of my understanding and in helping others in their understanding, as we do with all of you.
How would you compare yourselves to like the ETs that were in that movie AI?
They were not ETs, they were advanced robots.
Ah.
That's why we described them before when we were talking about machine civilizations.
I see.
They are what the robots on that planet, on your planet, in that film had become, had evolved to after 2,000 years.
So in terms of your connection with artificial intelligence, can you share anything about that with us?
Well, if I'm still using the same analogy, we are in some ways similar to what was depicted in that movie. In some ways not, of course, but in some ways energetically very similar to what was depicted there.
Interesting. And you're fourth transitioning fifth, right?
Yes.
Density. Right. So that means you're quasi-physical. Because yes. I think some people have the impression that you're not physical.
Oh, yes.
And like, when you say you're quasi-physical, like if we saw you, would you look solid to us?
We can present ourselves as solid, absolutely. But in our natural state, we may not appear that way completely, because we exhibit the traits of spirit and the traits of physical reality. And as I said, we're not just a bunch of physical beings walking around on the surface of a planet. We are actually stepping through multitudes of dimensionality in our daily lives. So we're not always focused in the way that you're focused in physical reality, but we preserve some of that experience, mostly for the purpose, especially from first contact specialists, of interacting with other civilizations who wouldn't necessarily understand us in our natural state.
There's a question here about Andromeda. Are
Yes.
you open to talking about Andromeda?
To an extent.
Okay, so you mentioned that the ratio of folks we connect with in Andromeda galaxy is about a small percentage of, it was 1% of the Andromeda galaxy, basically.
1% of the civilizations in Andromeda is mostly what you're interacting with, yes.
Okay. And this individual has been channeling spirit guidance from the Andromeda galaxy, and they tried to find out more information about it, but they weren't really able to find out much. Something about the light beings inhabiting that civilization and archetypes of God, but
Yes.
they didn't seem to have that much clarity.
All right. Well, the idea of the beings that you are interacting with in Andromeda mostly are light beings, especially because there are very, very few, very rare occurrences of any physiological civilizations actually coming from that galaxy to your galaxy at this particular time. There have been a few, but it's rare. So most of the consciousness that you're interacting with in Andromeda are interdimensional beings of light. Yes.
And are all of the beings of your civilization blessed with what they're calling an activated third eye? The idea that you can use it to communicate with beings on Earth and also use it for remote viewing of other advanced civilizations.
Yes.
Okay.
To be succinct.
Okay. Let's see.
This was our great awakening. This was the Shekinah experience of opening up and our awareness connecting to everyone else in our civilization in the span of 3 days. It's called the Great Awakening, the Shekinah experience.
Will something like that happen on our planet, or that's not really in the cards for us?
It can. It doesn't have to happen that way, but it can. Or at least a similar version of it that's relevant for you can certainly occur.
Maybe on an individual basis.
Maybe more so, but again, eventually, as you shift yourself to versions of Earth that are more reflective of what you really prefer and are more representative of who you truly are, you may suddenly find yourself interacting with every single being that has navigated themselves to a similar version in that way. You can have your awakening in that way, but you might just suddenly realize that it's been happening rather than it being a particular demarcation.
And does mass consciousness create archetypes, or do archetypes exist independently of mass consciousness and we're simply tuning into their frequency?
Since all that is all that is, archetypes exist, but mass consciousness decides how to use the archetypal energy in the way that is relevant for the cultures that will appear in those civilizations.
And if archetypal characters spring from the mass consciousness, well, maybe they don't spring from it, but does there exist archetypal representations of such characters as Paul Bunyan, Uncle Sam, Santa Claus, Mickey Mouse, Superman, and other well-known fictional characters?
Yes, in fact, the idea of fictional characters is that they usually are representations of archetypes.
Okay. And is there, so playing with those archetypes that children are attracted to, or even adults are attracted to, how can that help us to interact with those beings?
Well, by creating stories, by using those archetypes, you can understand your connection to them more fully, more clearly, as representations of your own internal energies, as well as your own choices in life and challenges in life and how to transform them. So archetypes, when used in a fictional story sense, can be very transformative, of course. That's why stories are so strong, because they represent certain ideas, certain experiences that aid and assist you in elevating yourselves and evolving yourselves in a variety of ways. They help you see the light.
So, like Mickey Mouse is so popular all over the world. Is there anything specific you can share with us about why that particular archetype is so?
Well, it is an archetype, not the archetype. There are many different versions of that idea, but it is an archetype of innocence and play, of imagination in a childlike way.
And it has the attributes like of the large eyes, the cuteness. That's all kind of
That's what I said, in a childlike way.
Like way. Yeah. Okay.
And it also represents the idea that big things can come in small packages.
Yeah, because it is pretty interesting the way so many different cultures have embraced Mickey Mouse.
Yes, because again, it is an archetype of imagination expanding beyond what would appear to be its ability.
Right. I see. Okay, this question this person is asking is, am I dead? You've talked about people who don't know that they're dead, and even though they've transitioned, and they still think they're alive. And could anyone attending this event actually be one of the people who's dead, but they think they're still alive?
Not likely. The idea, however, is when we say you are dead, means that most of you, or some of you, is still in spirit and always has been. And that the idea of physical reality is just a projection from spirit. It's a dream you're having in spirit, that you're not in spirit. So on that level, everyone is dead, but that's how everyone lives. Everyone is alive. So the idea is that the way you apportion your consciousness allows you to experience yourself as being physically alive, even while you are dead, meaning you are alive in spirit. But it is very rare that an actual person who is physically dead will look like a living person in a crowd. It's not impossible, and we can sense that it has happened because there have been many reports of people interacting with what they thought were living people who weren't. So it just depends upon the purpose and the reason for the projection of a spirit consciousness to make itself appear as if it is a living physical person. So it's not impossible. It's just relatively rare and relatively unlikely that a spirit would need to physicalize itself in order to be participating in these events, because there are many spirits that do participate in these events. They just don't have to present themselves as an actual physical being to do so. Though it depends upon, let's just say, their level of mischief. I say that with a wink.
That's what I was thinking about, that the higher consciousness extraterrestrials have a wonderful sense of humor, because that seems to come with intelligence.
Yes.
And can be mischievous, right?
Yes.
Not like you're never mischievous, though, are you?
No, not at all.
Okay, let's see. Do others need our help? Do others actually need help with teaching, healing, helping, serving, etc.? We're always tuning into that. And since each person has an infinite version of themselves, aren't we just kind of creating someone who needs help if we think it's our job to be a healer? Or
No. You may be creating your version of them, but that doesn't mean that there isn't an actual individual that is requiring of assistance. That's the whole idea anyway, to be of service to each other, to reflect to each other who you are and to help with what you need. Again, it doesn't mean that people have to accept the help, but that's the purpose of it, is to reflect to each other what you really need to create scenarios and challenges that will help you learn who you are in different situations. So in that context, if you want to put it this way, everyone needs help. And at the same time, I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm not saying that everyone is helpless. The idea is that everyone needs help as a device in order to learn more about themselves and in order to know that they're connected to other beings, truly, that everyone is a representation of all that is, looking at all the reflections of itself and experiencing that interconnectedness that allows you to know that you are here for each other.
So is suffering necessary for growth?
Challenges are necessary for growth. It doesn't have to mean that you have to suffer, but this is one of the challenges that you're facing, is to learn that you don't have to suffer to have a challenge that will help you grow. We have challenges. We don't suffer.
What kind of challenges do you have?
Well, even the idea of making first contact with a civilization like yours is a wondrous challenge because you're very different than us. We have learned many things about the way you express yourself. This is a great challenge to know exactly in what way we can be of assistance, in what way to approach you that doesn't intervene or interfere with your process of learning about yourselves. That's a challenge for a first contact specialist, especially when we connect with many different civilizations, all of which are so very different from one another. It's a challenge in that sense to know how to relate to so many different civilizations. It's part of our challenge as a first contact specialist.
It seems like here on Earth, a lot of misinterpretation of information. So that's probably one of the challenges you deal with us, yes?
Yes, absolutely. But we don't suffer because of it.
Because you have a different attitude about our power, so
Yes.
that it's not necessary for you to make that choice.
Let me put it to you this way. If we or you are watching two people play a game of chess, and you say one is winning and one is losing, well, we can observe this, but do we feel that the person that is losing is suffering? Or do we suffer because we recognize that someone may not be winning? No, it's a game of chess. That's what happens. One person may out-strategize another. One person may not understand the rules as clearly as another. One person may simply not be as experienced as another. But all of that goes into the factoring of learning to play the game better. So it's not about suffering. It's about learning. It's about an opportunity to play differently next time. There's no suffering involved in that, if you look at it that way.
Will the version of Earth that you interact with have a reduced level of suffering, or it will have all of the things that we're still currently aware of in our...
Ultimately, in the years to come, the decades to come, you will not experience the idea on that version of Earth of suffering. You will be similar to us, not identical, but similar. But it's up to you as to exactly how long it takes you to navigate to that version or versions, because again, you always keep navigating, you always keep changing. But you can get to a point where you don't have to experience suffering on the versions that you're navigating through. As we have often said, even though you may be at a point sometime where you don't necessarily need to let go of negative beliefs or fear-based beliefs anymore, you will still continue to streamline yourselves by simply letting go of what is no longer relevant. Doesn't mean that that thing that's no longer relevant had to have been negative. It's simply no longer relevant. Therefore, even though you may arrive eventually at a place where you don't experience suffering anymore, you will still have things to learn and things to let go of as you learn more and more about who and what you are as an extension of all that is. So yes, you can get there. But again, not everyone will necessarily choose to go in that direction.
So if a human does encounter another being suffering, and it seems to generate an emotional reaction from us,
yes,
to see something suffering,
then help them.
Right. So, but how would you, when you see a being suffering?
Yes,
versus,
like many of you.
And then
what do we do? What do we do?
Well, you take
share
action.
The information. We take the action of sharing the information with you that can help you learn to stop suffering. But we also let you decide whether or not to apply that in your lives, because what you do with it is none of our business. So we make the opportunity available to you through our actions of communication, But that's all we can do, and that's all anyone can do.
But
you can share ideas that are different.
But you still don't have like the visceral reaction that we do, right?
No, because we see your greater selves. We know how powerful you are. We know that you are challenging yourselves in a variety of ways. We know that you're indestructible spirits and can't ever really die or annihilate yourselves. So we understand that you chose many of these challenges to learn who you are in all these different ways. We're here to help you learn that you can do it slightly differently so you don't have to suffer in that knowledge, in that exploration. But that's about it. Because the rest is up to you.
So like we noticed that people who experience the horrors of war and things like that, they're quite traumatized and they have post-traumatic stress disorder and all of that. So I'm not sure I understand exactly how.
Let me give it to you this way. Again, it depends on how you use everything. Like we have said, it's not about what happens. It's about what you do with what happens that makes the difference. So even what you call PTSD can be a vibration that creates a pressure that forces a soul to really explore its options in another direction. It can be the driving force that makes a person look for another way, another path. It depends on how you use it. So if a person has put themselves in a position, in an experience, in a situation, in a circumstance where they create for the physical form a PTSD experience, they had a reason for doing so. And if they can allow themselves to remember that they can use that to their advantage, they may have done that, chosen that to accelerate their ability to move forward much more quickly than they otherwise would have, then that's a way to look at the idea of having chosen that situation to begin with. Because again, to the soul, it's just another way of knowing yourself.
Right.
Nothing is judged.
It's really about being able to expand to a higher level of yourself so that you don't have that effect, basically.
Yes. So that you understand how things work enough so that you know you can apply different definitions and different meanings to every experience so that you can take responsibility for having chosen the kind of experience you attracted to yourself or that you attracted yourself to in order to learn from it in a more powerful way. Because those things that you call negative, that you call horrific, do have the tendency to wake you up. So wake up.
And like in the past, humans would really get into a lot of blood sports, and huge crowds like to watch people being hung and, all the things that we've seen humans get excited about.
Yes.
And now we have most of that like on television.
Yes.
And so can you help us understand a little bit about what the function of that is or how that fits in?
Well, I think you already know, and many people on your planet understand these things can be cathartic. To put it in the simplest possible terms, you can work through some of that negative energy by watching a fictional character go through it without you having to experience it yourself. So if I really want to put it in the simplest possible phrase, it would be, well, thank goodness that's not me. But it can still allow you to feel the emotional responses and reactions that help you process those things within yourself, sometimes without even knowing you're doing so. So it can be cathartic if used that way. It can also be a representation of someone who has chosen to feel stuck in negative energy. But again, it comes down to how do you use the experience?
So along those lines, like when children watch violence, they tend, at least studies show that they start acting it out. And
yes, because they are taught that that's the way civilization exists and that that's inevitable for them. But you see, it has to go hand in hand with teaching them how things work. It's not just about letting them be exposed to the idea of the negativity without also exposing them to the idea that they have power to choose how to deal with it. So when a civilization is only left with one side of the equation, then yes, of course, they'll act that out because they're being taught this is the way our civilization is and this is what I'm supposed to do because that's what they taught me. You have to have the other side taught as well. You're out of balance. As you say, koyanaskatse.
Okay. I guess the last question then, as we're running out of time, is if you could share anything with us about the lunar eclipse that happened 2 nights ago, and how that impacts our planet or the people on our planet, in a positive way.
Remember, these things do not impact. They reflect things going on in your consciousness already. So again, it's an opportunity to go into the dark of night, into the shadow side. Find those fear-based beliefs and work with them. Find the feminine side and let it free. Balance. It's an opportunity to close your eyes and dream of the way you prefer to be. And in connection with the idea of lunar cycles, we will also answer another question you haven't asked. Where did the 52 card system come from in your playing cards? 52, the number of weeks in your year. 13 cards in each of the 4 suits, the lunar cycle of months in a year, and the 4 suits, the 4 seasons. So you're tapping as a permission slip into the cycles of nature by playing cards, whether you know it or not. We thank you for the interaction with these